A devoted wife mourned her husband's tragic death in a car accident for 3 years, slowly rebuilding her shattered life from the ground up, attending grief counseling sessions, and learning to smile again. But when she receives an unexpected phone call from Dubai, what she discovers about the man she loved will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about love, trust, and the lengths some people will go to escape their responsibilities. Rebecca Martinez had spent 1,095 days believing her husband David Torres was dead. She had grieved at his funeral, wearing black for months, and slowly learned to live without the man she thought was her soulmate. She had even started dating again, tentatively opening her heart to the possibility of new love. But on a Tuesday afternoon in March, as she sat in her Phoenix apartment reviewing client designs for a local restaurant, her phone rang with a number she did not recognize. The voice on the other end would destroy everything she thought she knew about her past, and force her to confront a betrayal so calculated and cruel that it would make international headlines. The caller was a woman named Fatima al-Rashid, speaking in accented English from Dubai. She had seen Rebecca's name in David's phone and felt compelled to reach out. What Fatima revealed in that 15-minute conversation would send Rebecca on a journey halfway around the world to confront the ghost of her supposedly dead husband, who was very much alive and living a completely different life with a new wife and twin children he had never bothered to mention. Rebecca Martinez was 34 years old when her world collapsed for the first time. She lived in a modest 2-bedroom house in Phoenix, Arizona, where the desert landscape stretched endlessly beyond her kitchen window. As a freelance graphic designer, she had built a successful business creating logos and marketing materials for local restaurants and small businesses. Her portfolio was impressive, and her clients often praised her attention to detail and creative vision. Her marriage to David Torres had seemed like a fairy tale for the first 5 years. They met at a coffee shop near Arizona State University, where Rebecca was finishing her design degree and David was working as a construction supervisor for a growing company. He was charming, ambitious, and spoke passionately about his dreams of starting his own construction business. David was 31 when they married, 3 years older than Rebecca, with dark hair and calloused hands that told the story of years spent working outdoors. David had a natural charisma that drew people to him. He could walk into any room and within minutes have everyone laughing at his stories about construction mishaps or sharing their own experiences. Rebecca's friends adored him, often commenting on how lucky she was to find someone so genuinely caring and supportive. He remembered birthdays, brought flowers without special occasions, and never failed to tell Rebecca how beautiful she looked, even when she was wearing paint-stained clothes after a long day of work. Their suburban life in Phoenix felt comfortable and secure. David's construction business, Torres Building Solutions, had grown steadily over 3 years. He specialized in residential renovations and small commercial projects, often traveling to job sites in California, Nevada, and New Mexico. Rebecca supported his ambitions, understanding that building a business required sacrifice and long hours away from home. David's business partner, Roberto Valdez, was a quiet man in his 40s, who handled the financial side of their operations, while David managed the crews and client relationships. Roberto had been David's friend since their early days working construction for other companies, and the two men seemed to complement each other perfectly. Roberto was methodical and careful with money, while David was the face of the company, charming clients and motivating workers. Rebecca and David talked frequently about starting a family. They had been trying for over a year, and Rebecca had begun researching fertility specialists. David seemed excited about the prospect of becoming a father, often pointing out children in restaurants or parks, and making comments about how he couldn't wait to teach his own kids to play soccer or help them with homework. These conversations filled Rebecca with hope and made their future feel bright and full of possibility. Their evening routine was simple but satisfying. David would return from job sites, covered in dust and tired from physical labor, but he always made time to ask about Rebecca's day and look at whatever design project she was working on. They would cook dinner together, usually something simple like grilled chicken and vegetables, and watch television or plan weekend activities. David loved hiking in the desert, and Rebecca enjoyed discovering new restaurants and art galleries in downtown Phoenix. Money was never a serious concern, though they were careful with their spending. David's business generated steady income, and Rebecca's design work provided additional financial security. They owned their house outright, having used David's savings from years of construction work as a down payment, and they had managed to build a modest emergency fund. Rebecca handled their personal finances, paying bills and managing their joint checking account, while David focused on business expenses and payroll for his employees. The phone call came at 11:30 on a Thursday night in September. Rebecca was already in bed, reading a design magazine and waiting for David to return from a job site in Los Angeles. He had left 3 days earlier to oversee the renovation of a commercial kitchen for a restaurant chain, a project that was supposed to take a week but had extended due to unexpected plumbing issues. The voice on the other end belonged to a California Highway Patrol officer named Sergeant Collins. His tone was professional but gentle, as he asked if Rebecca was the wife of David Torres. When she confirmed, the officer paused before delivering news that would change her life forever. David had been involved in a serious car accident on Interstate 10, approximately 60 miles east of Los Angeles. His vehicle had apparently skidded off the road during a rainstorm and rolled several times before catching fire. Rebecca's hands shook as she gripped the phone, asking questions that Sergeant Collins answered with patient professionalism. David had been alone in the vehicle. He had been pronounced dead at the scene. The accident occurred around 9:30 in the evening, and David's identification had been recovered from the wreckage. The officer explained that due to the severity of the fire, immediate family members would need to work with the coroner's office to arrange for remains to be transported back to Arizona. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and grief that felt too overwhelming to process. Roberto Valdez drove to Phoenix the morning after the accident, his face drawn with exhaustion and sorrow. He helped Rebecca navigate the complex process of working with California authorities and arranging for David's body to be transported to a funeral home in Phoenix. Rebecca found it strange that the coroner recommended a closed casket service, explaining that the fire damage was too extensive for viewing. At the time consumed by grief and shock, she accepted this recommendation without question. Roberto handled most of the arrangements, coordinating with the funeral home and contacting David's clients to explain the situation. Rebecca was grateful for his support, as she felt too overwhelmed to make decisions about flowers, music, or obituary wording. The funeral took place on a sunny Tuesday morning at a small chapel in central Phoenix. Nearly 200 people attended, including construction workers who had served on David's crews, clients whose homes and businesses he had renovated, and neighbors who had known him as a friendly presence in their community. Rebecca wore a black dress she had purchased the day before, still feeling disconnected from the reality of what was happening. Roberto delivered a eulogy that brought many attendees to tears, describing David as a dedicated businessman, loyal friend, and loving husband, who had died far too young. He spoke about David's vision for their construction company and his excitement about starting a family with Rebecca. Several of David's employees also shared memories, describing him as a fair boss who always made sure his workers were paid on time and treated with respect. In the weeks following the funeral, Rebecca struggled to establish new routines and cope with the profound loneliness that filled their house. Friends and family members called regularly, offering to bring meals or help with errands, but Rebecca often found herself staring at the walls and wondering how to move forward. David's clothes still hung in their closet, and his coffee mug remained in the same spot on the kitchen counter where he had left it before departing for Los Angeles. Roberto stopped by frequently during the first month, helping Rebecca understand the financial status of David's business and assisting with the process of closing Torres Building Solutions. There were several ongoing projects that needed to be completed by other contractors, and Roberto worked diligently to ensure that clients received quality work and employees found new positions with other companies. The insurance settlement from David's life policy provided Rebecca with financial security, though the money felt meaningless in the face of her loss. She deposited the check in their joint account and tried not to think about the fact that David would never again walk through their front door or call her from job sites to describe funny things his workers had said. 3 months after the funeral, Rebecca began to notice small inconsistencies that nagged at her consciousness like persistent splinters. While organizing David's papers to prepare their tax returns, she discovered bank statements for an account she had never seen before. The account was in David's name only, and the statements showed regular deposits and transfers that didn't correspond to any income sources she knew about. The amounts were substantial, monthly deposits of $3,000 to $5,000 that had been occurring for over 2 years. Rebecca called the bank to inquire about the account, but customer service representative explained that they could only discuss details with account holders or designated beneficiaries. Since Rebecca's name was not associated with the account, they could not provide any information about transactions or account activity. This discovery troubled Rebecca deeply, but she initially rationalized it as perhaps a business account that David had opened for special projects or tax purposes. Roberto had mentioned that David sometimes worked on side jobs during weekends, and Rebecca wondered if he had been saving money from these projects in a separate account. However, when she asked Roberto about additional accounts or side work, he seemed genuinely surprised and claimed no knowledge of any financial activities beyond their main business operations. Rebecca also found it odd that David's laptop computer had been in the Los Angeles hotel room rather than in his vehicle during the accident. Roberto had retrieved the laptop and personal items from the hotel, but when Rebecca tried to access David's email and financial records, she discovered that someone had recently deleted most of his files and browsing history. The timing seemed strange, as the deletions had occurred just hours before the accident. Another troubling detail emerged when Rebecca contacted David's cell phone provider to cancel his service. The customer service representative mentioned that David's phone had been used to make several international calls during the month before his death, including multiple calls to numbers in the United Arab Emirates and Malaysia. When Rebecca asked for specific details about these calls, she was told that call logs showed conversations lasting 20 to 30 minutes each, suggesting they were not business-related. Rebecca had never heard David mention international business connections, and their construction company focused exclusively on local and regional projects. When she asked Roberto about potential overseas clients or partnerships, he appeared genuinely confused and insisted that Torres Building Solutions had never pursued international opportunities. During this same period, Rebecca encountered 2 separate individuals who claimed to have seen David after the supposed date of his accident. The first was Maria Santos, a cashier at a grocery store David had frequented near their house. Maria approached Rebecca during a shopping trip and expressed confusion about David's death, mentioning that she had seen him in the store just the previous week. When Rebecca explained about the accident, Maria insisted she was certain it had been David, describing his distinctive laugh and the way he always asked about her teenage daughter's soccer games. The second encounter occurred when Rebecca visited David's favorite hardware store to purchase supplies for a home repair project. The store manager, Frank Peterson, commented on how sad he was to hear about David's accident, but then mentioned seeing David recently at a different location across town. Frank described a brief conversation about specialized tools for commercial kitchen installations, which aligned perfectly with the type of work David had been doing in Los Angeles. These encounters left Rebecca feeling unsettled and confused. She considered the possibility that grief was causing her to misinterpret innocent coincidences, but the consistency of details from both Maria and Frank seemed too specific to dismiss entirely. Rebecca began to wonder if her mind was playing tricks on her, or if there were aspects of David's death that she didn't fully understand. Sleep became increasingly difficult as questions multiplied in Rebecca's mind. She found herself lying awake at night, replaying conversations with David from the weeks before his death, and searching for clues she might have missed. Had he seemed nervous or distracted? Were there phone calls he had taken in private or business trips that lasted longer than expected? The more Rebecca analyzed her memories, the more she realized how little she actually knew about David's day-to-day business activities. He had always been vague about specific projects, mentioning client names but rarely discussing details about timelines, budgets, or challenges. She had attributed this to his desire to separate work stress from their home life. But now she wondered if there had been more deliberate reasons for his secrecy. After 6 months of sleepless nights and unanswered questions, Rebecca made the decision to hire a private investigator. She contacted Marcus Thompson, a former police detective who specialized in financial fraud and missing persons cases. Marcus was in his 50s, with graying hair and a methodical approach that reminded Rebecca of television detectives she had watched growing up. During their first meeting at Marcus's downtown Phoenix office, Rebecca explained her concerns about the secret bank account, deleted computer files, international phone calls, and witness sightings. Marcus listened carefully, taking detailed notes and asking specific questions about David's business relationships, travel patterns, and financial responsibilities. He was professional but empathetic, acknowledging that Rebecca's suspicions were not unreasonable given the circumstances. Marcus began his investigation by examining public records related to David's supposed death. He contacted the California Highway Patrol to request copies of the accident report and spoke with the coroner's office about the identification process. Within 2 weeks, Marcus discovered the first major inconsistency. The accident report listed the victim's height as 5 feet 8 inches, but David was 5 feet 11 inches tall. The discrepancy was significant enough to raise serious questions about the identification process. Further investigation revealed that the victim's dental records had never been compared to David's. Despite this being standard procedure for fire-damaged remains, the identification had been based solely on a driver's license found in the wreckage, and no family members had been asked to provide dental records or other identifying information. Marcus explained that this represented a serious breach of standard protocols and suggested the possibility of identity confusion or deliberate deception. Marcus also traced the secret bank account Rebecca had discovered, working with a forensic accountant to analyze 3 years of transaction records. The account showed a pattern of regular deposits from a consulting company called Desert Strategies Limited Liability Company, which was registered in Nevada, but appeared to have no physical address or legitimate business operations. Withdrawals from the account were primarily wire transfers to banks in Dubai, Malaysia, and the Cayman Islands, totaling over $400,000 during the previous 2 years. The investigation into Desert Strategies revealed that David was the sole owner and operator of the company, which claimed to provide construction consulting services to international development projects. However, Marcus could find no evidence that Desert Strategies had ever completed any actual work or maintained legitimate client relationships. The company appeared to exist solely as a vehicle for moving money from David's construction business to overseas accounts. Marcus's most shocking discovery came when he traced David's passport records. The State Department confirmed that David had obtained a second passport 6 months before his supposed death, claiming his original passport had been lost during a business trip. However, records showed that David had used his original passport to travel to Dubai just 3 weeks before the Los Angeles accident, returning to the United States only 2 days before his supposed death. Immigration records also revealed that David had made 4 trips to the United Arab Emirates during the previous year, each lasting 1 to 2 weeks and coinciding with supposed business trips to California or Nevada. Rebecca had never been told about these international travels, and Roberto claimed complete ignorance of any overseas business activities. The forensic accountant also discovered that David had been systematically draining money from Torres Building Solutions for over 2 years, creating false invoices for non-existent subcontractors and materials purchases. The scheme was sophisticated, involving multiple shell companies and carefully timed transfers that made the theft difficult to detect during routine bookkeeping. Roberto appeared to be unaware of the embezzlement, as David had handled all financial software access and bank reconciliations personally. Marcus presented Rebecca with evidence that David had been planning his disappearance for at least 18 months, methodically transferring assets overseas and establishing the infrastructure needed to assume a new identity. The car accident appeared to be entirely coincidental, involving an unidentified transient, whose death provided David with an unexpected opportunity to complete his escape plan. Phone records from David's secret cell phone showed extensive communication with contacts in Dubai, including regular calls to a number registered to Fatima al-Rashid. Marcus traced this number to a luxury apartment complex in downtown Dubai, where rental records showed that David Torres had been listed as a tenant for over 8 months. The apartment was registered under a slightly modified version of David's name, David Torres Rodriguez, suggesting he had been living in Dubai while maintaining his supposed residence in Phoenix. Banking records from Dubai showed that David had opened multiple accounts using his second passport and false documentation claiming residence in the United Arab Emirates. These accounts contained over $600,000, representing money stolen from his construction business Rebecca's joint accounts, and insurance settlements from fabricated claims. The investigation also revealed that David had married Fatima al-Rashid in a ceremony in Dubai 7 months before his supposed death, in California. Marriage records showed that David had claimed to be divorced, providing forged documents to support this assertion. Fatima had given birth to twin boys just 3 months after David's fake funeral in Phoenix, meaning she had been pregnant during his final visits to Arizona. Armed with Marcus's evidence, Rebecca made the difficult decision to travel to Dubai and confront David directly. She used vacation time from her design business and purchased a round-trip ticket to the United Arab Emirates, knowing that this journey would either provide closure or destroy the last remnants of her faith in human nature. The flight to Dubai gave Rebecca 12 hours to process the magnitude of David's betrayal and prepare for a confrontation she had never imagined would be necessary. She rehearsed conversations in her mind, wondering how David would react when faced with evidence of his elaborate deception. Part of her hoped there might be some reasonable explanation. Though Marcus's investigation had made it clear that David's actions were calculated and intentional, Rebecca's hotel in downtown Dubai was modest but comfortable, located within walking distance of the luxury apartment complex where David apparently lived with his new family. She spent her first day adjusting to the time zone difference and gathering courage for what she knew would be an emotionally devastating encounter. On Tuesday morning, Rebecca positioned herself across the street from David's apartment building, watching the entrance and trying to spot familiar faces. The building was impressive, with marble facades and uniformed doormen, clearly expensive and far beyond what David could afford through legitimate construction work in Arizona. At 10:30 in the morning, Rebecca saw a man emerge from the building, who looked exactly like her supposedly dead husband. He was wearing casual clothes and pushing a stroller containing 2 infant boys, accompanied by a woman in traditional Islamic dress, who appeared to be in her late 20s. The sight of David alive and apparently happy with his new family hit Rebecca like a physical blow, confirming her worst fears while simultaneously filling her with rage. Rebecca followed David and his family to a nearby park, maintaining enough distance to observe without being detected. She watched David play with the twin boys, pushing them on swings and laughing at their attempts to climb code playground equipment. The scene was heartbreakingly normal, showing David in the role of devoted father that he had promised to play with Rebecca's future children. After an hour at the park, David's family returned to their apartment building. Rebecca waited until evening before approaching the building's entrance, where she asked the doorman to contact David Torres Rodriguez about a visitor from the United States. The doorman made a phone call and directed Rebecca to the 12th floor. David's face went completely white when he opened his apartment door and saw Rebecca standing in the hallway. For several seconds, neither of them spoke, and Rebecca could see David's mind racing as he tried to process this unexpected development. Finally, David stepped into the hallway and closed the apartment door behind him, clearly hoping to prevent his wife from overhearing their conversation. Rebecca's voice was steady despite the emotional turmoil she felt as she asked David to explain how he was alive when she had attended his funeral 8 months earlier. David initially attempted to claim that Rebecca was mistaken, insisting that he was David Torres Rodriguez and had never lived in the United States. However, when Rebecca mentioned specific details about their house in Phoenix, their wedding ceremony, and their shared plans to start a family, David's pretense crumbled. The conversation that followed was painful and surreal, as David admitted to faking his death, but attempted to justify his actions by claiming he had felt trapped in their marriage and overwhelmed by financial pressures. He insisted that he loved Rebecca, but had panicked when the construction business began struggling and had made impulsive decisions that spiraled out of control. Rebecca listened to David's explanations with growing disgust, particularly when he claimed that his marriage to Fatima was primarily for immigration purposes, and that he planned to eventually return to the United States. She presented David with copies of Marcus's financial evidence, including bank records showing the systematic theft from their joint accounts and his construction business. David became defensive when confronted with evidence of his embezzlement, claiming that he had always intended to repay the money once his new business ventures in Dubai became profitable. He insisted that Fatima was unaware of his previous marriage, and that revealing the truth would destroy her life and traumatize their children. The conversation ended when Fatima opened the apartment door and asked David who he was speaking with in the hallway. Rebecca introduced herself as David's wife from Arizona, watching Fatima's face transform from curiosity to shock to horror as she realized the implications. David attempted to maintain his lies even as both women confronted him with questions he could not answer convincingly. Rebecca spent an additional 2 days in Dubai, meeting separately with Fatima, to share information about David's deception and ensure that Fatima understood the legal implications of being married to someone who was already married. Fatima was devastated to learn that her marriage was invalid and that David had stolen money to fund their lifestyle. But she was grateful for Rebecca's honesty and offered to cooperate with any legal proceedings. Rebecca's return to Phoenix marked the beginning of a complex legal battle to recover her stolen assets and hold David accountable for his crimes. Working with Marcus Thompson and a team of attorneys specializing in international fraud, Rebecca filed complaints with law enforcement agencies in both the United States and the United Arab Emirates. The financial recovery process was complicated by the international nature of David's scheme and the fact that he had hidden money in multiple jurisdictions. However, investigators were able to freeze several of David's accounts and recover approximately 60% of the stolen funds. The remaining money had been spent on David's luxury lifestyle in Dubai or transferred to accounts that proved difficult to trace. David was arrested by Dubai police and faced extradition proceedings to return him to the United States for prosecution. His arrest was covered by local news outlets in Phoenix, generating significant public interest in the case and prompting other potential victims to come forward with information about suspicious business dealings. Roberto Valdez was cleared of any wrongdoing after investigators determined that David had carefully concealed his embezzlement activities and that Roberto had been genuinely unaware of the financial irregularities. Roberto assisted with the investigation and helped identify clients and employees who had been harmed by David's actions. Fatima al-Rashid found herself in an extremely difficult position, as her marriage to David was legally invalid, and she faced potential deportation if authorities determined that her residency status was based on fraudulent documentation. Rebecca and Marcus worked with immigration attorneys to help Fatima navigate the legal system and protect her children's welfare during the proceedings. The emotional impact of David's betrayal was profound and long-lasting for Rebecca. She attended counseling sessions to process the trauma of discovering that her entire marriage had been built on lies and that the man she loved had been capable of such elaborate deception. The counseling helped Rebecca understand that David's actions reflected his character flaws rather than any shortcomings on her part. One of the most difficult aspects of recovery was rebuilding trust in her own judgment and intuition. Rebecca had ignored several warning signs during her marriage, including David's secretiveness about business activities and his reluctance to discuss long-term financial planning. She learned to recognize these patterns and develop better boundaries in future relationships. Rebecca also discovered strength she had not known she possessed. The process of investigating David's disappearance and pursuing justice required courage, persistence, and resilience that transformed her understanding of her own capabilities. She became an advocate for other fraud victims and began speaking at seminars about recognizing financial deception in relationships. The experience taught Rebecca valuable lessons about the importance of financial transparency in marriages and the need for both partners to be actively involved in understanding family finances. She encouraged other women to insist on access to all bank accounts, tax returns, and business records, regardless of their partner's protests about complexity or confidentiality. Rebecca's design business flourished as she channeled her energy into creative work that provided both income and emotional satisfaction. She expanded her client base to include larger commercial projects and began teaching design courses at a local community college. The financial independence gave her confidence that she could handle any future challenges without depending on someone else's support. 2 years after David's arrest, Rebecca began dating again, approaching new relationships with hard-earned wisdom about red flags and warning signs. She was honest with potential partners about her experience and insisted on gradual relationship development that allowed time to observe behavior patterns and character traits. The legal proceedings against David ultimately resulted in his conviction on multiple charges including fraud, embezzlement, and bigamy. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to Rebecca and other victims of his schemes. However, Rebecca had already moved forward with her life and viewed the legal resolution as closure rather than revenge. Fatima al-Rashid was able to remain in Dubai with her children after immigration authorities determined that she had been an innocent victim of David's deception. She and Rebecca maintained occasional contact, bonding over their shared experience of betrayal and their mutual concern for the welfare of Fatima's sons, who would grow up knowing their father was a criminal. The case received national media attention and was featured in several true crime publications, helping raise awareness about the sophisticated methods used by individuals who fake their own deaths to escape financial and personal responsibilities. Rebecca participated in these interviews to help educate other potential victims about warning signs and prevention strategies. Rebecca's recovery journey taught her that healing from betrayal requires time, support, and a willingness to examine patterns that may have contributed to vulnerability. She learned to distinguish between healthy trust and naive blindness, developing skills to evaluate people's character through actions rather than words. The experience also reinforced the importance of maintaining individual identity and interests within a marriage. Rebecca realized that she had become too dependent on David's approval and had sacrificed some of her personal goals to support his ambitions. She committed to maintaining her independence and pursuing her own dreams in any future relationships. Most importantly, Rebecca learned that surviving betrayal could lead to personal growth and strength rather than permanent damage. While David's actions had caused tremendous pain, they had also revealed Rebecca's resilience and capacity for rebuilding her life on stronger foundations. Rebecca's experience shows us how elaborate deception can hide behind the facade of a loving relationship. But it also demonstrates the power of persistence and courage in seeking truth. If this experience resonates with you, or if you have encountered similar red flags in your own relationships, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was living a double life? What warning signs did you notice, and how did you handle the situation? Your experiences could help other viewers recognize potential deception and protect themselves from similar betrayals. If you found Rebecca's courage inspiring and want to see more stories about people who refuse to accept easy answers when something felt wrong, please subscribe to True Crime Village and hit the notification bell. Next week we will explore another incredible case of survival and resilience that will remind you never to underestimate the power of human determination. Share this video with anyone who might benefit from Rebecca's hard-learned lessons about financial transparency and trust in relationships. Sometimes the most important conversations begin with the most difficult stories, and your willingness to share could make a real difference in someone else's life. Thank you for joining me today, and remember that even in our darkest moments, we have the strength to seek truth and rebuild our lives on foundations that cannot be shaken by deception.